What would you do if your mother-in-law burned your dead mother's will and smiled at you while pouring tea? People say grief can make you see things that aren't there, but I wasn't seeing things. I was watching. Every move, every word. The fireplace that had been cold for days suddenly glowing with fresh embers. The faint scent of scorched paper that clung to the drapes long after the fire was out. The way Lorraine looked at me when I walked into the room, composed, pleased, like nothing had happened. But something had. Something final. My mother's will had vanished, and Lorraine wanted me to believe it never existed. That Margaret, the woman who raised me with books and fire and grace, had left nothing behind. I said nothing, not then. Some betrayals are too precise for rage. They demand silence and strategy. My name is Evelyn Hartley. Before the lie, I lived in a quiet kind of mourning, the kind that doesn't scream or collapse or beg for someone to make it easier. I had lost my mother, Margaret Hartley, after 2 long years of cancer and slow decline, and when the world finally took her from me, it felt like a house collapsing inward. No explosion, just silence. Just dust. Daniel was kind. He held me the way men think holding is enough. He told me I didn't have to be strong, that I could lean on his family now. I tried. I really did. Lorraine, his mother, met me at the door with a vase of white lilies and a pale pink cardigan wrapped tightly around her shoulders. She called me darling, with that tone women use when they're not sure if you belong. She didn't cry at the funeral. Instead, she commented on the floral arrangements, said they were understated but appropriate. I remember standing next to her at the cemetery, the wind cold against my skin, wondering if she could feel anything at all. In the weeks that followed, I moved into their world. Dinners at the long mahogany table. Sunday brunches with polite conversation. I learned how to answer Lorraine's questions the right way. Short, vague, agreeable, never too certain, never too sad. She never said anything cruel, not directly, but everything she said had teeth. I suppose your mother did the best she could, she offered one afternoon, folding napkins with precision. Raising a child alone is complicated. Or, Margaret's bookstore must have been quaint. Not much of a legacy, but still charming. I nodded. I smiled. I tucked the anger behind my ribs where no one could see it. The only thing that mattered was the will. My mother had been meticulous. She had left a document in a pale green envelope with her wax seal on the front. Inside was her final letter to me, the building deed to the bookstore, and a set of instructions that felt more like blessings. It wasn't just an inheritance. It was her way of still speaking, even after her voice was gone. For weeks, I kept it in the top drawer of my desk, unopened but present. A promise. Then one day, it was gone. I searched the drawer, the desk, the room. Nothing. Daniel said maybe I misplaced it, that grief could cloud memory. Lorraine pressed her hand to her chest and said, I'm sure if it was important, she would have told someone else. Her eyes never left mine. That was the moment I realized I wasn't just grieving my mother. I was being erased beside her. It happened on a Wednesday. Late afternoon, the sky hung low with rain that never quite fell. Lorraine was hosting her book club, a monthly ritual of curated wines, monogrammed napkins, and women who spoke in admiration laced with fear. I wasn't invited. I never was. She said it was for women of a certain generation. Daniel had forgotten his laptop charger that day. I told him I'd swing by and drop it off. I knocked once and let myself in. The house was too quiet. I called out. No answer. The smell hit me before anything else. A thick metallic smoke still lingering in the hall, not the scent of wood. It was sharper than that, more intimate. In the living room, the fireplace was still warm. Embers glowed faintly beneath the grates. I moved closer. A jagged edge of parchment stuck out from the ashes, curling upward like a finger. I reached in carefully, pulling it free. The paper crumbled in my hand, blackened and hollow, but what remained was unmistakable. A golden wax seal, broken in two. Margaret's seal. I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I just stood there, breathing shallow, feeling the edges of myself tighten. I walked to the study, opened the drawer where I had kept the will. Empty. When Lorraine returned, she carried a bottle of red and a plate of lemon cookies. Her eyes met mine with that same studied warmth. "I thought you had errands," she said, brushing a crumb from her blouse. "I came to drop something off," I replied. My voice was steady, cold. She smiled a little too tightly. "You look pale. Are you sleeping well?" That night, I asked Daniel again about the will. I told him it was missing. He hesitated. "Lorraine told me your mother never finalized it. She said it might have just been a draft. Maybe your memory's playing tricks." That was the moment I understood. This wasn't just loss. It wasn't just grief. It was erasure. Lorraine hadn't just taken something from me. She had silenced my mother's final words. She had burned her voice, her intent, her love. And she expected me to accept it. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I went quiet. Because rage is loud, but strategy listens. In the weeks that followed, I became a shadow moving beneath the surface. I smiled at dinners. I kissed Daniel goodnight. I folded Lorraine's linen napkins when she left them in the dryer too long. But something inside me had shifted. Not broken, hardened. I began waking up before dawn. I drove to the county records office, pretending I had errands to run. I asked about deed filings, property transfers, anything that might tie back to the bookstore or my mother's estate. I learned how to request document copies, how to trace old paper trails most people forget even exist. I found out that my mother had kept a safe deposit box at a regional bank she once called her last vault. I went there alone, told the manager who I was, showed my ID, waited while they confirmed her access log. Inside that box, among faded photographs and an old silver pen, was a second envelope. It wasn't the final will, but it was close. A notarized draft, her handwriting still crisp in the margins, her signature still steady. My hands shook when I touched it, but I kept my face calm. I drove straight to Olivia Chen's office that afternoon. She had been my mother's lawyer years ago before she left the firm to work independently. She hadn't heard of my mother's passing. Her voice softened as soon as I said the name Margaret Hartley. She read the draft in silence, lips pressed tight. Then she looked up and said, "This is real. It won't be simple, but it's enforceable, especially if we can prove the original was destroyed deliberately." She agreed to help. Not formally, not yet, but she made calls, sent letters, prepared filings, taught me what to ask for, what to say, and what not to say. Meanwhile, I prepared the bookstore. It had been closed since my mother's illness. Dust clung to the windows like fog, and ivy had started creeping along the back wall. I scrubbed the glass, painted the threshold, fixed the lock. Daniel asked if I was trying to sell it. I told him I was just keeping it clean. He nodded, distracted, distant. I didn't push, I didn't explain. Because Lorraine couldn't see what I was doing. She didn't see the pieces forming. She had taken my mother's voice. But I was learning how to speak in a language she would never understand. I moved quietly, like a hand sliding beneath still water. The bookstore deed was still legally in my name, according to the backup will. Olivia advised me to transfer it into a trust one that reflected my mother's original intent, with clear stipulations. It would never be sold, never be used for profit. It would become what my mother always wanted it to be, a public reading space, a place for those who never felt seen, a home for voices others tried to quiet. I contacted the local historical society next. My mother had been a minor legend in their records, donating rare editions, helping restore damaged books after the town flood. When I explained my plans, they offered support immediately, a preservation grant, A quiet partnership, a tentative date for a rededication ceremony. We didn't announce it, not yet. I began compiling everything: bank statements, the notarized draft, a forensic analysis of the burned remains. Olivia located a handwriting analyst, a document conservator. We filed a motion to reopen the estate under quiet seal. Lorraine had no idea it was happening. Not yet. Then came the footage. The house had an old security system, a cloud backup Daniel had set up a year ago and forgotten about. He gave me access without thinking much of it, assuming I was still sorting memories after the funeral. I found it on a Monday evening. Footage from 4 weeks prior. Lorraine, alone in the study, opening drawers, pulling out a green envelope, holding it in her hands, staring at the seal, then disappearing into the living room where the fireplace glowed. No sound, no clear angle of the burn, but enough. Enough to raise questions. Enough to make Daniel stop telling me I was confused. I printed stills and tucked them into a folder. The next day, I sat across from Daniel at the kitchen table. The space between us felt wider than it ever had. I didn't cry. I didn't accuse. I placed the folder between us. "This is what your mother did," I said, "and this is what my mother left behind." He stared at the pages, one by one, his face tightened, his shoulders folded inward. "She told me you were imagining things," he whispered. I met his eyes, not angry, just steady. That's what gaslighting feels like. He didn't speak again for a long time, and in that silence I knew I had him. Lorraine opened the door with her usual poise, dressed in cream cashmere, her pearls resting just so at the base of her throat. Behind her, the house smelled like eucalyptus and order. But there was a shift in her face when she saw the man in the black suit standing beside me, envelope in hand. I didn't speak, the process server did. "Notice of civil filing. You've been served." She hesitated before taking it, blinking at the embossed seal. Her smile flickered. Her eyes slid to mine, searching for softness, for hesitation. She found none. "What's this?" she asked, voice clipped. Daniel stepped forward. He didn't touch her. He didn't raise his voice. He just said, "Open it." We followed her into the sitting room, the same room where she'd hosted tea that afternoon she burned the will, the same fireplace, now cold. She tore the envelope open and scanned the first page. Her shoulders tightened, her chin lifted. "This is absurd," she said. "Margaret's will was never finalized. You're embarrassing yourself." I stepped to the side table, picked up the folder I had brought, and laid it in front of her. The draft was notarized and found in a safe deposit box registered in my mother's name. Olivia Chen confirmed its legal weight. We filed to reopen the estate. She didn't touch the folder, didn't even look at it. "You can't prove anything." I opened the folder myself and slid out the stills. Frame by frame, Lorraine in my study, Lorraine holding the envelope, Lorraine walking toward the fireplace. "You told Daniel I imagined it," I said quietly, "that the will never existed, but you knew exactly what you burned." Her mouth tightened. For a moment I saw the mask slip. Not guilt, not fear, resentment. "You don't understand what that bookstore would have done to this family," she said, her voice rising just enough. "You don't understand the burden you carry when you're trying to hold a name together. That place was a pile of dust and debt. Margaret was a dreamer. You needed to be guided." I let her finish. Then I said, "You buried her twice, once in the ground and once in fire." Daniel spoke then. Not to her, to me. "I should have listened," he said. "I should have known when you went silent that something was wrong." Lorraine reached for his arm, but he stepped back. "I watched you twist everything," he said to her. "You made me think she was unraveling, but it was you. You just couldn't stand not having the last word." She stood frozen in the center of her perfect room, the legal documents wilting in her hands, her son turned away from her. I didn't yell. I didn't gloat. I just walked out the front door. Daniel followed. Behind us, Lorraine didn't call out, didn't beg. Because control is a mirror, and when it breaks, all that's left is the silence. The settlement came quickly. Lorraine didn't want a trial. Her lawyer called Olivia within 3 days of receiving the complaint, asking for discretion. The legal language was careful, deliberate, soaked in polite desperation. She agreed to recognition of the notarized will, to restitution, and to a formal statement acknowledging interference with estate materials. No admission of guilt, just a quiet, legally binding surrender. She paid out of her own accounts. The check arrived in an envelope with no return address, no note. The bookstore's trust was finalized, ownership restored, deed corrected, grant approved. I filed the paperwork myself, watching each document stamped and entered into the system. The woman behind the counter asked if I was reopening a business. I said, no, I was restoring a voice. Daniel moved into the bookstore apartment with me 2 weeks later. He didn't say much at first, just brought a duffel bag and stood at the threshold like a man stepping into something earned. I didn't make promises. I didn't offer comfort. I told him trust would take time. He said he understood. He called Lorraine once. I heard the conversation from the kitchen, his voice low but firm. I don't know what she said. He hung up without replying. She sent a single voicemail the following week. A brittle message wrapped in forced gentleness. She said she never meant for things to escalate, that she was just trying to protect the family, that she missed us. I didn't respond. Some wounds don't require confrontation, just closure. The neighborhood changed in how it looked at her. The book club thinned out. Her name was quietly removed from the Garden Society's donor plaque. She kept attending church, but fewer people sat near her. Word travels softly in small towns, but it lingers. Daniel saw it happen. He didn't defend her. He started therapy on his own. Said he needed to understand how silence became his default. I told him it was a good place to start. Sometimes we talked late into the night, sitting cross-legged on the bookstore floor. Sometimes we didn't talk at all, just existed near each other, in the space Margaret left behind. He asked me once if I thought forgiveness was necessary for peace. I said peace doesn't always require forgiveness. Sometimes it just needs truth. The bookstore reopened on a rainy morning in early spring. The front windows were clear again, the shelves dusted, the bell over the door polished until it gleamed. I didn't advertise. I didn't need to. People remembered Margaret Hartley. They remembered her readings, her laughter, the way she handed books to children like she was giving them a key to something sacred. They came, quietly, steadily, one by one. I stood behind the counter, not as a business owner, but as a caretaker, a woman holding the thread of someone else's story and tying it back together. Daniel hung new curtains in the apartment upstairs, painted the kitchen. Never asked for space, just offered it. On the day the Historical Society plaque was installed, I wore my mother's cardigan, the one Lorraine once called outdated. It smelled faintly of lavender and old paper. I stood with Olivia on the front steps as the sun broke through gray clouds. The plaque read, "In memory of Margaret Hartley, a voice that outlived the silence." Inside, I placed my mother's fountain pen and her letter in a glass case near the front. I didn't reread the letter. I didn't need to. I remembered every line. That evening after we closed, I sat in the reading nook she had built with her own hands. The wood still creaked the same way. I looked out the window at the street beyond, at people walking by, umbrellas tilted against the breeze. The world had moved on, but I hadn't disappeared. I had stayed, reclaimed, rewritten. The woman who once stood in the center of someone else's family had become the keeper of her own legacy. Sometimes, when the wind rises just right, I can still hear the fireplace crackling in Lorraine's sitting room. The sound of burning paper, the sound of erasure. But here, in this room, the silence is different. It isn't void, it's peace. Before I closed up for the night, I walked to the center of the room and turned off the lights. The bell above the door jingled once, though no one came in. I didn't look back. Because when you reclaim a voice that someone tried to destroy, you don't whisper anymore. You build a room where others can speak. And they will. She thought burning the will would bury my mother's voice. Instead, it gave mine a place to begin.